Hey everyone, and welcome to Office Hours. Hey Yuri. If you all have questions and you want to go ahead and start getting those into the text chat, or if you want to go ahead and raise your hand if you'd prefer to come up on stage and give us your question that way, you can sort of get started with that, and we'll do our intros, and then we can just go. Hope everybody's having a good Friday. Let's see. I guess the only announcement that I wanted to mention is that we still have the EdgeDB Cloud beta ongoing. So if you want to try that out and you're not already signed up, you can go to our cloud channel here on Discord, or you can click the button at the top of our website at edgedb.com and you can sign up for the waitlist there. The wait is not very long, so if you're interested, don't let that scare you. I am Devin Campbell. I'm our head of developer relations here at EdgeDB, and so I try to help you be more successful with EdgeDB. And I'm joined by Yuri. Do you want to introduce yourself, Yuri?
Yeah, I'm the co-founder and CTO of EdgeDB.
There we go.
I'll be very short with my self-introduction.
Looks
Awesome.
like we've got some questions rolling in. Are there any plans on building support for efficient time series storage and queries?
Not on our priority list, but definitely is possible. So, for example, EdgeDB is based on Postgres, so there is a lot of extensions in Postgres that can help us with this. One of them is timescale. It's been a while since the last time I checked what exactly they open sourced, but they do have an open source component to their time series product. So potentially we could integrate with that, or we could create our own when we have slightly more resources. But the vision of EdgeDB is to have most of those things either pluggable or available automatically out of the box. Like one of the ideas that we have for our full text search is that it will be possible to just plug in Elastic essentially and just make it work for you automatically, transparently, provided that you want it to happen. So you configure HTTP to do that. I can imagine the same thing eventually happening with time series storage. Either it's going to be an extension, maybe a blessed extension developed by us or by the community when we have the extension API, or maybe it will be an integration with a third-party cloud. Like we can potentially build an integration where you would enable it and we just automatically synchronize the data with another database for you. And the sky's the limit here. It's not immediately, it's not on our current priority list, but we're thinking about it. And I see a related question in chat. Any use on WASM plugins? No, not yet, unfortunately. We just don't have bandwidth to work on that. It's definitely the future. It's definitely what will eventually, well, I shouldn't say definitely, but we have very high degree of certainty that WASM is really the future here. So it will happen, but we need to find some resources to dedicate towards that. But it's really the dream, is to allow you to write an EdgeKill function, let's say in Rust or in C++, and just make it available to your EdgeKill query in EdgeDB Cloud and locally and whatnot. So WASM enables that, and we really want to have that capability eventually. But it's just like it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to make this happen. I mean, Postgres out of the box gives you V8 extension, for example, so you can run WASM code. It's not an official one, but it's a third-party one that you can install to Postgres. So I mean, there is some groundwork that's already available, but on the other hand, we also need to define a lot on the EdgeDB side, the exact shape of the API, exactly what's allowed or not. In that context, will we give you a way to, let's say, do some low-level network operations out of those extensions or not? Like maybe it would be cool if an extension could make an HTTP request. I don't know, like lots and lots of questions to answer, lots and lots of things to design. Eventually, we'll start working on this.
Here is a question we get pretty often. Do we have a date or a date range for the general availability of EdgeDB Cloud?
So it's in private beta, which I assume you already know about because you're here in our Discord. If not, then check out the Cloud channel. About the GA specifically, we want to launch paid tier as soon as possible. We are currently working on kind of like last remaining bits of improvements to the cloud infrastructure and implementing the stuff that is still sort of missing. But the bulk of it is ready essentially. So we're in the final stages of testing the infrastructure and just implementing the whatever is left to prepare it for a proper launch. The proper launch though will first happen for the paid tier and followed by free tier in a couple of months later, hopefully in time with EdgeDB 4.0 release. I want to be completely transparent here. But on the other hand, it can happen slightly after, making free tier economical for us so that we can actually give you a decent free tier experience that you will like is just hard. There is a lot of infrastructure to build. We have most of that infrastructure, but there are still some remaining questions that we need to answer and things to implement. So hopefully in 4, 5, 6 weeks, we will start offering paid tier accounts for cloud, paid tier instances for the cloud. And after that couple of months, free tier should come alive.
Maybe it's also worth saying that the 4.0 release should be sometime around end of October. So if cloud ends up corresponding with that gives you a bit of an idea there. When it comes to scaling EdgeDB, talking about sharding and failover, is there anything that users need to keep in mind beyond the normal concerns that you would have in Postgres?
Not really. We should have native support for sharding eventually so that you could declare, hey, this type should be sharded over this expression in our schema. We don't have that yet, but we will. Failover will eventually be a feature of cloud. And I mean, we will have the necessary kind of mechanisms and documentation pages for how you could do it yourself if you want to self-host HTTP. But ultimately, we want to give you convenience that in the cloud, you would just configure this thing trivially, essentially. It might not be part of the initial cloud rollout when we introduce the paid plans, but hopefully we'll be able to follow up really soon with this functionality. The good news about cloud is that it's going to have continuous deployment. So we're not going to be waiting for 4 months to release a new cloud update. It's pretty much going to be, hey, the feature is ready, let's deploy it, or the feature is not quite yet well tested, let's hide it behind the beta flag that you can enable and try to use it, similar to what other database companies do. Most likely we'll do the same. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
What about support for down migrations? Is that something we're looking to implement soon?
We want it. We know that it's been continuously requested by the community. Perhaps on the next call in 2 weeks, we can invite Sally to join, and maybe he can tell us a little bit more about this. Basically, it's on the list of the compiler team. They will be looking at it soon. Right now, they're busy with a couple of other things. One of them is full text search support for HTTP 4.0. The other is improving the configuration system, which we need for a few other exciting features in HTTP 4.0. After that, hopefully, they will have bandwidth to focus on optimization and improvements and potentially looking at migrations downgrading.
Do we have any suggestions for alternatives in the interim while that's in the works?
Alternative approaches?
Yes.
Well, one of them is just use HTTP Watch, essentially, and use some simple data with it. The other approach is create separate databases. I mean, every instance of HTTP can have arbitrary number of databases in it. So you can create a new one and experiment in that new one. You can uh, dump restore your stuff into the new database, apply your test migration, see if it works. If it works, then basically move on with it, which is cumbersome. I'm not saying that this is a perfect workflow. I know that it's somewhat suboptimal, but it is a workflow. The other way you can do it, you can create a fixture system in your application. We want to add native support for it so that you could say, in your EdgeDB toml file, you could say, hey, run this command after a new database is created or something like that. We still need to ponder on the exact design. But ultimately, you can have scripts that populate your development database with test data. And then you create a database, you run that script, then you iterate with migrations. You feel that, hey, those schema modifications don't make any sense. I need to get back, kill the database, create a new one, and move on. And again, I fully recognize that it's not ideal, but it is what you can do now without waiting for us to implement the proper mechanism, which can take some time because downgrading migrations is like it's like an NP problem. It's hard. Lots of things can go wrong with the data, with your schema and whatnot. It's a big mechanism. I cannot promise it to happen like really soon. It might take us some time. Maybe HDB 5.0. Maybe we're lucky, and maybe I'm overestimating the problem. And Sally will tell us that, hey, I'll spend 3-4 weeks with my team, and we're gonna have them in HDB 4.0. But realistically, it might take us slightly longer time for that.
The watch workflow is pretty nice if you haven't tried it, and it might get you some of the way toward what you're wanting to do. You can make changes to your schema, and then if they don't work out, you can walk them back, and you don't have a migration that represents that whole flow from beginning to end. You can just create the migration at the end. All right.
I see the follow-up to the x86 question. So
Yeah.
it's 32-bit support. The project is pretty cool. The link project V86. There is a link in chat. It's the first time I see it, but it does look pretty cool. I don't know how to answer this question. I guess the priority for us is to make sure people can use HDB on their laptops, developing locally or like their dev boxes, and in the cloud. And the environment for that is 64-bit, pretty much everywhere. So this is the main sort of kind of effort, is to make sure that HDB runs smoothly. And I mean, I think pretty much everybody knows that packaging is like one of the hardest problems in computer science. Packaging for HDB is insane. The infrastructure, everything is automated nicely. There is like a nice infrastructure for doing that. But adding a new target is still a lot of work, a lot of testing, a lot of adjustments, a lot of bug fixing and patching, because HDB has a number of dependencies that can just work in amusing ways, in really amusing ways on 32-bit infrastructure. So I can imagine that I don't expect it to just go smoothly and just everything to work out of the box. It never does, simply. So what this means is that somebody will have to spend roughly anywhere from like 3 days to a couple of weeks to make this happen. And I don't think that we have resources for that. Would be nice to have, but ultimately you can try to build HDB locally yourself. You can try to compile it for 32-bit on 32-bit system, for example, or in 32-bit VM, and see if it works. And if it does, maybe try to run it yourself there. If it all works, then maybe you can consider it. But unfortunately, not a priority. We have to be extremely mindful at the stuff we prioritize. HDB team is like 18 people now, or maybe slightly more. It sounds like a lot, but in reality, it's not. The HDB platform is huge. We are dealing with a lot of stuff, so every minute counts, essentially.
Okay. User says we're processing large amounts of data in pandas data frames that then needs to be updated and inserted in EdgeDB, are there any best practices concerning batch updates? For example, breaking down the data into smaller chunks?
Um, I think you should experiment, but the actual answer that I'm trying to reach for is for Devon to remind us of this conversation on the next probably tools call. So the context for this is that we want to have a new, and we wanted this since HTTP 1.0, just to be clear. We want to have a new capability in the protocol, in the binary protocol of HTTP. It's so-called execute many flow. We initially implemented it in async PG, an asynchronous driver for Postgres. And essentially what it does, it creates a busy loop of just getting data and sending it to Postgres as fast as possible, just on the client side, essentially. And we want to have the same capability in our EdgeDB protocol, where you could say, hey, this is an iterator in your Python library or JavaScript library or whatnot. It can iterate over gigabytes of data, potentially. Let me just plug this iterator, just pipeline the output hose of this iterator right to the to HDB client, and let HDB client execute it as efficiently as possible. It sounds like an easy solution, but the results is that it can increase throughput like 10 times, 100 times easily. It's amazing what an optimization technique like this can actually do. So we want to implement it, and while there, we can also add like sort of like native support for Panda data frames in the Python client. It's also doable, and the necessary sort of foundational work has already sort of happened in HTTP 4.0. It's already in the main branch. It's already in the nightlies. So now it's sort of easy, like all the necessary piping essentially is there to implement high-level user codecs of custom data types, be it a Panda data frame or something else, from HDB specific types or subtypes to whatever stuff you want in your programming language, and vice versa. And the reverse is also true. So we just need to invest a little bit more time to make your life vastly easier and more interesting. Hopefully this can actually be implemented for 4.0, like this execute manual, like execute batch idea. So we'll need to discuss it with the team. But right now, again, back to the original question, I think the only good question that I can give you is to iterate and try a couple of different approaches. Yeah.
Super quick follow-up. I think I missed in the docs how to walk back watch mode changes. Is there a command for this? So as far as I know, you just change the schema back and save it again. Is that how you would advise Yuri, or is there a different way to approach that?
Yep, I'd look at that.
Yeah. Yeah, just change your schema back to whatever it was before, whatever you want to revert back to, and save it, and then watch should automatically apply that.
And
And
Victor, by the way, there is a sorry, Devon,
no,
I
that's
didn't mean to interrupt.
no.
There is a nice follow-up in the chat. Try for union construct for your stuff.
Yep.
We have documentation that I think even has an example on that, on loading like complicated big JSON chunk and breaking it apart and efficiently sort of inserting and updating the database with it. Oh, okay. So you already use the best practice. Just experiment with exactly the way how you chunk your data.
Question from a colleague. Currently, the GraphQL.
Can I quickly, like another thought is that potentially you can have, if the data is unrelated to each other, meaning that there's like no links between different chunks of data to other chunks of data, you can parallelize your process. You can use async IO for maybe using async IO is a bad idea, but I mean If it's Python, you can have multi-process architecture where you spawn 20 Python processes, each of which would have a connection to EdgeDB, and then each of which will just process a separate chunk of the data that you have. This is an easy technique, so perhaps you already use it. But if not, this is the obvious way how you can parallelize things and achieve great results.
Currently, the GraphQL implementation of EdgeDB does not allow non-scalar variables. This breaks compatibility with some tools and libraries in the ecosystem, such as graph federation and schema stitching, that this user would like to use. Do we have any plans to prioritize this?
So this is tough. I assume the question here is really if you can basically have a GraphQL variable that contains in itself part of GraphQL query. So we discussed that multiple times with the team. Conceptually, this is relatively easy to implement, but realistically, there is like a lot of stuff that can sort of happen, like a butterfly effect out of this, because it's going to be harder for you to basically control the computational complexity of your GraphQL query, because they can explode if user submits a variable that has like a different GraphQL query in it. Essentially, things can get slow, things can get unpredictable. HDB compiler relies on the assumption that it's not used all the time, that most queries can be cached, and you can only cache a query if you know its full shape ahead of time. And if we allow this GraphQL feature, this assumption breaks essentially. So the answer here is maybe. We know how to implement this. We are trying to be very cautious, though, because it can really impact negatively user experience for people who have basically an expectation that, hey, HDB GraphQL is going to be super fast and fluent and whatnot. And then suddenly every GraphQL query has like a different fragment in it, and suddenly the performance is not what they wanted it to be. So it's a delicate thing. Well, we can take another look at this, but unlikely to happen in HDB 4.0. Before that, we just need to do like a deep sort of performance optimization pass at HDB. We're working on this. If the compiler becomes 10 times faster, which is actually a realistic goal for us, then we can just enable this feature.
Okay. Are there any plans to address some of the low-hanging fruit in the Python driver? Maybe, maybe you could specify, bearded engineer, what those low-hanging fruit are from your perspective,
Yeah,
and maybe we can
basically,
address
if
them.
there are race conditions and if the client somehow falls apart in async or gather, it's a bug. Like we have to fix it. So global variables, you should be able to shadow them essentially. So every client allows you to basically redefine the global variables and all other settings. So essentially, you should be able to create new clients from the already existing ones. At every level, you should be able to redefine the global variables. And I mean, we designed our. I'm reading as you type. Essentially, you have performance concerns about this. So the answer here is that you shouldn't have those concerns, and if there are like really performance problems with it, then it's a bug, and we need to take a look at it. Basically, the HTTP protocol is and the whole client API is designed with this assumption that if you want to change it at the query level, just type client with config query. That's it. Like, yes, it will create a client instance, but that client instance is a very lightweight object. Every client instance that you create, descending from the original root client that you created with the create client API, it's essentially a thin wrapper that just keeps a little bit of state associated with it. The global variables that you defined on it, the session config, and some other things like timeouts and some other configuration, and maybe soon, I don't know, custom codecs and for data and whatnot. But it's a very lightweight object. It doesn't actually create a physical new connection to the database. Instead, it still shares the original connection pool, essentially, the original I/O of the original root client object that you used to create all those descendant client objects. It sounds a little bit complicated, but ultimately, from the user standpoint, essentially, every time you want to have modification to the state, like a custom config variable or whatnot, just type client dot with config and dot query. That's the idea. Yes, this thin client wrapper is going to be a throwaway, and that's not a problem. That's just fine. Python isn't as fast as C++, but things like this are reasonably fast, especially when you compare it to the actual network latency that you have and the actual expense of the real-world database operations. Creating an ad hoc thin Python object and just killing it is essentially free. You have to have ridiculous amount of operations per second to basically see this when you profile your application. So I would advise experimenting with that. Most likely it will just work for you. And as for bugs with async gather and wait, there must be bugs. So if you can give us a script to reproduce the problem, we'll probably fix it quickly for you.
Just a quick reminder, everyone, if you want to ask your question on the stage, feel free to raise your hand and we will bring you up. If not, text questions are fine, and we'll keep working through those. I would love to run EdgeDB Rust in Wasm, but due to its dependency on Takio, it is not possible, I think. Perhaps I'm wrong. Do you know if this is right, Yuri?
I'm not a Rust expert myself. I'm a very beginner at Rust, so I don't know if there is a way to use Tokyo within WASM or compile a project that has Tokyo as a dependency to WASM. I assume the answer is no, just due to how the question is phrased. What I can say is that EdgeDB Rust client library, at least initially, was structured in such a way that the Tokyo would be just one way how you could do I/O. Like the way code is laid out is that we could add something like async stat, for example, or just blocking socket I/O, and kind of reuse most of the Rust machinery for parsing the protocol, marshalling types, and whatnot, which is arguably one of the most complex things about the EdgeDB protocol. So if you really want to experiment with this, I guess the answer is basically try to write your own code, essentially your own take a look inside EdgeDB Rust and create a client that uses blocking sockets, for example, the easiest and the simplest way of I/O, which should be able to then be compiled into WASM with the appropriate WASI layer.
We've actually got two questions about contributing, one that I missed earlier and a brand new one. So one of them is there anything an external supporter could help with, like a 10% project? And then the other one is how do you get started contributing to EdgeDB Python?
So I think the second question is easier. All of EdgeDB is open source essentially, except the cloud infrastructure. But everything else is open source under available license, and everything happens on GitHub. So basically, the answer is that you can submit a pull request. Maybe before that, create an issue, and maybe before once you create an issue, if you don't see us replying to it because we're busy building cloud and whatnot, follow up on Discord or somewhere. It's unfortunately the reality of just real world reality that sometimes it's hard to catch up with all the different repos we have on GitHub because we have a client for pretty much every major programming language now, and we also need to maintain EdgeDB itself. So if you see that, hey, I created an issue and they didn't get back to me in a couple of days, follow up on GitHub, on Discord. Devon will pick it up, run it by the team, prioritize it a little bit. You will get some feedback in that GitHub issue, and then you can work on a pull request, essentially. Given that everything is open source, it's basically as easy as that. The only reason why I'm not suggesting you to do a pull request as a first step is that maybe I just don't want basically people to spend some time and effort into something that might not get merged, because it could be already implemented in a different way, or maybe there are plans to implement the same functionality in a different way or something. But then again, if it's a bug, for example, like, hey, for example, you investigated async gather problem and you saw that, hey, this I know how to fix this bug. This is the fix. Then just create a pull request. There is nothing else you need to do. It's more complicated with features, new features. It should be very straightforward with bug fixes. Fix the bug, write a unit test. Make sure the CI is green, we'll merge it. Maybe we will ask you to change a couple of maybe we'll nitpick a little bit on the code or whatnot, but ultimately fixing bugs is easy, just like in any other open source project. We welcome every contribution and appreciate every help that you can give us, whether by submitting issues at all or submitting detailed issues with easy ways to reproduce them, or submitting PRs. Everything is welcome.
And I think that user in particular was working with Fantix a little bit to try to get set up on that. So I'll go back after this call and see where you are with it, and if there's anything else we need to work out, I'll try to help you along with that.
Yes,
what about?
And to address, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
No, to address the first question about 10%
Yep.
time, just don't want to forget about that one.
Yeah.
It's tricky because again, EdgeDB, it's a fairly large team and it's a fairly large platform. So sometimes, I'll be totally transparent and honest. Sometimes it's like I want to contribute 10% of my time, but then you need direction for the team, which ends up distracting them. But then next week you don't have the 10% of the time, which means a highly inefficient process for everybody involved. So essentially, I think the easiest way to do this is to work on something relatively non-invasive, where you know that, hey, this is not an intersection of multiple different teams within EdgeDB or multiple different people who will have to sort of sign off on this or give me green light. Fixing bugs is one of those things. Improving documentation is another one of those things. Writing tutorials, for example, how to run EdgeDB, how to create an application with EdgeDB and, I don't know, Nuxt or some Rust framework or some Golang framework. That would be hugely appreciated because we need to do more of this sort of outreach, and we need to have more examples on how people can use EdgeDB efficiently. Helping us on Discord, for example, that would make Devon's life easier. Promoting EdgeDB, helping us to promote it, also helpful. But if you just want to code something, then I'm pretty sure that we have lots and lots of issues that we just didn't have time to take a look at. In our client libraries, they're typically more low-hanging fruit than the EdgeDB core, which is vastly more complex. If you feel really ambitious and want to dive into EdgeDB core, it just will take some time for you, essentially, to familiarize with yourself with the code base and everything else. But again, the main problem is that inevitably you will have to sort of synchronize with the main team. And if it's like an on and off thing for you, then I cannot promise that it's going to be a good and smooth experience, contributing experience for you, simply because There is now no way to kind of build consistent cadence here and make you basically part of the team while you are also not part of the team. So this is very tricky, essentially, and I suggest to execute your own kind of sense on how you can find yourself useful. Again, we really appreciate you wanting to contribute. There are ways how you can do it. Clients, documentation, tutorial, promotion, Discord, those are the easiest ones. Everything else is a little bit harder. But I mean, I'm not saying no. I'm just saying that potentially, if you want to contribute the new feature to EdgeDB, it can be a fairly long experience where we would ask you to write an RFC, and then we will disappear for a couple of weeks reviewing that and understanding how do we want to do it. You might need to redo your contribution multiple times over. So it's complicated. It's a complicated product. So just to keep that in mind.
I've got a related question, actually, Yuri. Some of the client bindings started out as community projects, right?
Sure.
Was there communication on the front end, or did those just pop up and EdgeDB noticed them and sort of brought them into the fold?
The latter. So this happened with James, actually, who is the guy responsible for EdgeDB UI and most of EdgeDB website and whatnot. James actually created a UI for EdgeDB, UI client, graphical user interface, which we noticed and really appreciated and started a conversation with James. And then he ended up working with us. And then he created the driver for EdgeDB Dart, and I think for something else, but I might be mistaken. It happened with Frederick, I think. He created EdgeDB Go for Golang, and we noticed it as well and started working with him. It happened to Quinn. Quinn created EdgeDB.NET, and now he is also, and then later he created at EdgeDB, EdgeDB Java driver. So yeah, it happens. It happens all the time with us. I think the best ways how you can actually end up being part of the team is to create something on the side, and then we would just want to adopt it really and make you part of the team. Like this is, and this is not true just for HDB. It's basically true for pretty much every open source company. This is the best way how you can do things. So on that end, specifically going back to client libraries, I think we cover pretty much everything except PHP and Ruby. So if you happen to be a Ruby enthusiast or a PHP enthusiast and you know a thing or two about low-level I/O and whatnot, and you feel like you are an expert of that language, we would appreciate help with Ruby and PHP. And I guess Quinn would also appreciate some help with Scala and Kotlin. So if you know how to use those languages idiomatically, or you happen to use them in production and you have some problems with the way how we designed our APIs in HDB Java, which is like really early, again, I would really appreciate help with tutorials, documentation, better API design, and whatnot.
Somebody was asking about, Swift.
Swift is cool, and yeah. Yes, it would be cool to have it. I should have included it in the original list, of course.
What about using kappa.ai on the Discord server?
So I never used it myself. I'm not sure about you, Devon. I think we can try to evaluate it.
Yeah, we'll take a look at it, and I guess it's safe to say we're looking at some other ways to add more value to the Discord to make it faster to get answers and just make it easier to find the answers that are already on the Discord. So you may see some things rolling out in that direction in the next few weeks or months.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Kappa.ai project. It looks really cool. Not gonna lie, it looks it looks like it can solve a lot of problems for us. So we should take a look.
Cool. We'll check it out. Thank you. User remembers that it was mentioned there will be a more detailed update on using PG Vector to make a ChatGPT doc. Is that coming soon? Yes. it's coming soon. I've been involved in working on it. I'm not writing it myself, but I've been involved in working on it for the past week or two at least, and it is coming along. So you will see a detailed guide relatively soon.
Devin, can I ask you to kick our dear team member Scott from the chat? He's abusing the system, incepting us to work on Haskell client. Scott,
Maybe just
if jokes aside, like why not? Like Sally is a huge enthusiast of Haskell. I think he knows the language pretty well, so he would really appreciate that. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it can happen. Let's not kidding actually. So why not? But again, creating a new client is not an easy feat. It's usually it's like months of work at least, like focused work. For something as alien as Haskell, it's not it's probably something that maybe you can do or Sally can do, but not much anybody else on the team. So yeah, we can tentatively put it on the to-do list.
we'll probably take a couple more questions and then wind up for the day. One of them is, will the EdgeDB client libraries have any features specific to EdgeDB Cloud? Or maybe as we have been building out EdgeDB Cloud, what interesting things have we realized that the client libraries lacked?
So it's an interesting question, and I only have like one thing to say. EdgeDB client libraries do have a feature specific to EdgeDB Cloud, and that's the way how you connect to an EdgeDB Cloud instance. So essentially, the way how you can sort of understand that this instance is a cloud instance is just by looking at its name. So if a name doesn't have a slash in it, it means that it's a local instance. And I mean, it can be a local instance on your cloud server or whatnot, but it's a local instance in a way that HTTP clients will not try to do anything like special about it. But if there is a slash, an instance, in the instance name, it means that it's an HTTP cloud instance. So the client will actually resolve it appropriately for the HTTP cloud endpoint. This is how we want to implement the zero configurability issue, to really make HTTP Cloud as easy to use as possible. Again, nothing prevents you from deploying your own cloud instance and whatnot, but for people who don't want to be bothered with that, and that's the majority of people, we want them to have an incredibly easy time connecting to the cloud instance, as easy as possible. We want to remove all the friction. So HTTP clients have this specific thing where they know how to distinguish cloud instance names from local instance names, and they know how to resolve and connect to them. That's it. There is nothing else.
Here's a hard-hitting question. How do we feel about being almost halfway through the proposed new release cycle? Do we feel good about it, or is it going too fast? 4 months is very different from 1 year. I can speculate that everyone would probably say it's going too fast, but maybe we also feel good about it. What do you think?
I feel good about it.
Yeah.
I think the compiler team who was kind of hit the hardest with HTTP 3.0 being that ambitious, shipping that much stuff in it, and things were kind of just kept piling on itself. So there was like a significant amount of stress. Like, hey, when will we actually release HTTP 3.0? We should have released it 4 months ago. We wanted to release it in 6 months after 2.0, and now it's almost a year. So there was non-trivial amount of stress, internal stress, which is not good. Being on a fast release cadence might not necessarily result in the most exciting feature-packed major releases, but it removes a lot of headache, internal headache that the team has essentially, because they know that the release will happen regardless. If the feature is not ready, it's going to be shipped in the next one. And the next one, you don't have to wait a year for it. So there is no anxiety about just stuffing the feature last minute simply because it's like, it's now or never. So I think ultimately it's a very good thing, and it's a very good decision that we've made to basically have short release sprints instead of having year-long release marathons. And so far, HDB 4.0 shapes up nicely. I think all the stuff that we wanted it to have will end up being in it, so it should be fine. Postjs is, there is a question about any words about Postjs.
Sure.
Postjs is tricky in a way that it's GPL. So we cannot just embed Postjs and give you a nice API and make it a built-in. Because, I mean, in reality, if Postjs wasn't a GPL thing, we would just embed it because it's the GIS extension of Postgres, the most comprehensive one, the stuff that everybody uses, the high quality one, the most tested one. It's a no-brainer to just include it and basically give you nice standard library types, GIS types. It would be cool if we could do that. But we cannot switch the project license to GPL just to include Postgres. So that means that we have to package it. We have to package it separately. We have to package it as an extension. And that just means extra work. And then if you do that as an extension, it means that you also have to somehow make it available in client libraries. So all client libraries will have like an additional client library, basically like a sidekick library to work with the JS types and whatnot. So the necessary sort of work towards it is actually happening. Like in HDB 4.0, we are refactoring the configuration system so that extensions can declare their own config values and whatnot. So this is important. This is important for PG Vector. We were kind of able to narrowly solve this problem without tapping into the config, but ultimately it was clear that for the extension system to work, we have to have proper config system. So it's being implemented now for 4.0 and should be done soon. The other kind of component of this is to allow client libraries easily implement codecs, custom codecs for custom types. So basically that will, and it's a work that had to happen at the protocol level, essentially, at the network protocol level. But now we have this capability. It's merged in HDB 4.0. It briefly escaped 3.0, but it's going to be part of 4. And that means that when we have the Postgres extension, it will be super easy to implement client support for all the types, for all languages that we have. And we won't have like any bundling problems or whatnot. It's going to be easy to solve. So that is like another component to it. The last one essentially is we need to have extension API, and it doesn't have to be polished, it doesn't have to be public or documented, but it has to be good enough internally at least, and we also have to have a separate build pipeline, build packaging pipeline essentially. It's like a separate set of CI jobs that will package that extension, build it for all the architectures, test that it's compatible with HDB, implement the necessary cloud infrastructure so that you can load Postgres extension in your cloud project. So now it's like these big logistical questions that have to be answered. And then there is also a work of just opening up Postgres and mapping all of like the 100 plus types that they have to and 100 plus functions that they have to nice SQL equivalents that really sort of feel properly integrated with SQL, with the query language that we have, with the data model that we have. So what I'm trying to say is that there is a lot of work that needs to happen. But personally, I would love that work to happen in HDB 5.0. It's not going to happen in 4.0. We don't have resources for that. But we want to have extensions. We want to have Postgres and maybe even extension marketplace ready for 5.0.
That sounds exciting. Scott points out here that we want to be careful how we use LLMs because they could reduce the signal to noise ratio on Discord, and that is true. We'll try to balance that. And another user asks, is there a plan for an LSP for IDEs, and yes, there is. I don't think we have an ETA for it, but yes.
Yes, there are plans. We don't have ETAs. We sort of overcame one of the interesting and hard challenges on the path to having an LSP, and that's a recoverable parser. So HQL is a fairly large language. And in order for you to be able to do the stuff in ID, like autocomplete or whatnot, you need to be able to parse incorrect queries, like queries that are half written or half finished. And it was not clear how to do it. But thanks to Alias, he was able to pull some incredible hacks, and now we have this capability. And the core of the parser is now powered by Rust. It's like a lot of custom Rust code. So it basically uses the current parser infrastructure, the old parser infrastructure that we had, and replace the engine part of it with a custom written engine in Rust that supports tree-sitter, error recovery, and lots of other interesting hacks. So now we have that capability. Now we actually can parse broken HQL. And that was like the main sort of kind of speed bump on the way there. Now we just need to find resources for someone to basically hack the support of it into the compiler, hack the support of partially broken queries into the compiler, so that the compiler can still do the necessary stuff, going through the parsed syntax, partially evaluating it, inferring all the stuff that we do when we compile things like types, cardinality, functions, and then building up enough context to give you relevant suggestions. That's for like this IDE autocomplete experience. That will enable that. But that should be relatively easy. At least we know how to do it. We didn't know how to solve the parser problem and found a way to finally solve it. This one is more straightforward. So this is one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is things like code formatters, for example. So by the way, if somebody has 10% time and then they happen to be a Rust engineer, they can help us with that, for example, because we would love to be able to format code, basically have like a built-in code formatter and linter built in the CLI. It has to be written in Rust. Most of the stuff is the fundamental kind of work is already there. We just need someone to spend a relatively significant amount of time implementing proper code formatter using that infrastructure. So this is the sort of like the second part of the tooling rig that we want to be available for HTTP eventually.
I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you, Yuri. Thanks, Scott, for
Thank you, guys.
supporting from the audience. And thanks, everybody who showed up. Hope you all have an awesome weekend. And we will see you back here on the stage in 2 weeks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, guys.